is our problem. There are legitimate questions about whether Joe Biden will be too old for the job, particularly when you think about another 4 years into it, and fighting an election against Donald Trump, where he will have to be absolutely on top of his game every day, and you can't really afford to have a bad day like the one in the debate a couple of weeks ago. So it does. I think it does require his advisors, top donors, top senators to say to him, "Come on, this is reckless, really, what you're doing. You have to stand aside for somebody else." And I know it's nice bravado, him bringing up that show and saying, "Challenge me at the convention." But there's a little important detail that they're not allowed to challenge him at the convention. The delegates elected to the convention in the primaries are pledged to support him, and they can only be released by him. So that's a bit of that's just bravado, but it's not a real political statement to say, "Challenge me at the convention." I think they do have to persuade him to go, is my view.
In the studio with us, Claire Fox, and also down the line, William Hague, as we continue our dissection of the day's biggest stories. And President Biden has seriously gone on the offensive to keep his place as the Democratic presidential candidate. He rang MSNBC's Morning Joe show yesterday and said, "Any of these guys that don't think I should run against me, announce for president, challenge me at the convention." Claire, is anyone going to do that?
Well, more and more people are speaking out, both in the media and amongst senior Democrats. Apparently some of the donors are very, very worried, even though they've been given amounts of money. This is, to me, an international tragedy. I can't get over it. When I saw the original debate, by the way, this is how bad it was. I thought he did quite well because I had such low expectations because I've been following the story for longer than apparently anyone else was. But then I realised that I was thinking he did quite well because I was thinking he got that sentence out okay. That was okay. That sounded reasonably coherent. So the disaster is what's happened subsequently, because then there was a discussion about how he didn't cope. He's not coped subsequently. And now I just feel as though we're being gaslit. The latest, which does make me laugh, is he says that the elites are out to get him. Yeah. And I think, oh my God, he's becoming Trump. What happened there? And the reason why I think it's tragic is because you're not allowed to properly have a conversation about who's going to run America. And I had a mother with Alzheimer's and dementia, and I can just see it all. And she also, by the way, consistently said to me, "I know you think there's something wrong with me, but you know what I mean, and you're trying to put me in a home and you're trying to do these things to me, but I'm not going to let you." Do you know what I mean? And then she'd try, then you'd find a piece of chicken in the, in the cupboard. Anyway, I'm getting upset. What I'm saying is, for goodness sake, stop this. It's too serious. I want someone to make an intervention.
But are they going to be able to do that? And William, we were discussing, Stig and I,
courage. They need courage.
Maybe. Are we making this worse? Has the narrative sort of seeped in now that they can't remove themselves from it?
Well, I don't think we're making it worse. This is a problem because it is our problem. There are legitimate questions about whether Joe Biden will be too old for the job, particularly when you think about another 4 years into it, and fighting an election against Donald Trump, where he will have to be absolutely on top of his game every day, and you can't really afford to have a bad day like the one in the debate a couple of weeks ago. So it does. I think it does require his advisors, top donors, top senators to say to him, "Come on, this is reckless, really, what you're doing. You have to stand aside for somebody else." And I know it's nice bravado, him bringing up that show and saying, "Challenge me at the convention." But there's a little important detail that they're not allowed to challenge him at the convention. The delegates elected to the convention in the primaries are pledged to support him, and they can only be released by him. So that's a bit of that's just bravado, but it's not a real political statement to say, "Challenge me at the convention." I think they do have to persuade him to go, is my view.
I just wanted to put in a note about age, only because, as you know, William, in the House of Lords, where we both sit, some of the sharpest minds in the place are kind of like 90s plus. Do you know what I mean? Put us all to shame. For me, he can be 80 so-and-so if he's able to be coherent. The problem is that he's old and not well or infirmed in some way. And so it's not just a question of the fact that I anticipate that he should be sprinting about the place, but if his mind was sharp and all the experience of being 80-something came to bear. But that's not what we're seeing. And the fact that we're seeing it with our own eyes, we have been seeing it for many months. And by the way, there has been something of a conspiracy of silence, which is people saying, oh, I've only just noticed. And it's like, for goodness sake.
We've been talking about this programme for years as well. Do you know him, William? Have you met him? Can you see any difference in him? Because if you've met him in the past, because he's always had he's had a speech impediment, which doesn't help. Because when you hear him sometimes speak in a certain way, he's always spoken like that. That's not a question of infirmity. That's a question of just how he speaks. What do you make of the change that you can perceive from a distance?
Well, I haven't met him recently, so I can't compare exactly like for like. But I met him a lot in the past when he was vice president, and so we're going back here 8 or 10 years. And he was very talkative, very fluent. In fact, you could never shut him up. And he could talk for an hour, without drawing breath. And in those that remember every detail, and okay, it was a stream of consciousness, but it was consciousness in a logical order with no difficulty whatsoever. So that is very different from the person we saw on the TV screens. And Claire's quite right about that. There are people who can be 90 in the House of Lords and they're absolutely on top of their game. However, there are a great many who are not. And unfortunately, Joe Biden is veering into that category. And
this in the end gives the election to Trump, doesn't it? I mean, ultimately, where this ends, this is because Trump. We were talking about this, Rosie and I, and Rosie was witnessing the debate. Trump just had to stand there. He just had to stand there and not be Joe Biden, and he came across quite well. That's what's happening here, isn't it? I mean, that's in the end, William. Someone's going to have to say to him, "You carry on like this. The next president is Donald Trump."
Yeah, no, this is my point. He's making Trump look good. And Trump is able to, Trump is clever in a streetwise way. And he knows that he can just hold back in those sorts of situations. Whereas normally Trump gets into trouble because he has to say outrageous things. Biden is creating a situation where Trump doesn't have to say any outrageous things. And that definitely gives Trump the edge in this election.
I think that's when you realise the power of Donald Trump to think, I just do nothing.
Yeah, but it's also the case that Donald Trump already, politically, we have to acknowledge this, has a big popular base. And extraordinary things are happening. For example, the number of people from ethnic minorities in America who are supporting Donald Trump. He also speaks to a different kind of politics. So this just confounds the idea that the Democrats are completely out of touch. The fact that they've got somebody leading them that nobody will acknowledge shouldn't be in charge of America, let alone the Democrat Party, at a time when already politically they're not seen as having their finger on the pulse of the American electorate. Yeah,
it becomes sort of a metaphor, doesn't it? We had someone on earlier who said with a straight face, both candidates should submit to a live cognitive exam.
Oh my God.
It was a serious point made by a serious political figure, and the fact that's
in the States, that's where the narrative is.
That's where the American political bodies got to, where the two candidates for the most important job in the world have to submit to a live cognitive exam to prove that they have the faculties. It is extraordinary, and not in a good way.
Let's start with NATO then. So leaders are gathering in Washington, D.C. for the 75th anniversary of the founding of the Defensive Alliance. And we know Keir Starmer is heading off to join them. Just days into the job, he's clearly at the deep end. But how strong will he appear if he shows up without a plan? In the Times today, the former head of the army has troop numbers and supplies alarmingly low at a time, he says, when the world is more dangerous than at any point since 1945. On his first day in Number 10, Starmer called President Zelensky to reassure him of the UK's support. But should we be making promises we don't know we can keep? Claire, I'll start with you. We hear from the Labour Party say, look, 2.5% of spending, but we don't know yet when we can commit to that. Is that strong enough?
The issue is that it's a rhetorical commitment to actually defending the country. And defence is very important. And they've said that they're definitely going to do it. And I think that one of the things that we've got with Labour is that they're a little bit defensive about the fact that people might think that they're a bit weak on patriotism, on defence, on war and that kind of thing. Well, war, fighting to defend ourselves because of the reputation Labour's got. So I think that they certainly want to commit themselves to that. I think the issue is going to be over in NATO is that the world is in chaos. And one of the things that will be interesting is to see whether Starmer can get over thinking about what he's coming over like, but actually negotiate the relationships that he's got to deal with over there. France is falling apart. What to do about Ukraine not being allowed in NATO or otherwise. What to do about the fact that there is controversy over the President of the United States and the fact that he might not be the president, and then Starmer's got somebody else to deal with. So I just think it's not just a money issue. It's a question of whether he is going to be able to be deft, fast enough on his feet to deal with very complicated relationships on the international stage.
Yeah, well, he'll be meeting, William, with the president of the States today. I mean, potentially there may be some awkwardness to try and navigate there.
Well, I think what Keir Starmer can do here is offer strong continuity, actually. And that is always easier than saying, well, I'm going to turn everything around in the first few days. The last government was very energetic in supporting Ukraine, often pushed the United States into doing the right thing. So I hope Keir Starmer can continue to do that. It's going to be a really important summit because things are very difficult in Ukraine. What the Ukrainians really need is the caveats on the use of weapons that are supplied to them lifting so that they can use them more widely. They also need a better supply of them. And it would be great if NATO took over more of that supply rather than it being organized by the United States, which is what's called Trump-proofing this process to some extent. Preparing for the possibility of Trump coming into power. So there's a lot that could be achieved, but it's a case of strong continuity rather than saying, well, Britain is changing its policy with the new government.
Are we strong enough to do that, William? Because, I mean, well, Keir Starmer said that the changing government in the UK will make no difference to the UK's support, but the length of time we've been doing that has significantly depleted our ability to continue to do that.
Oh, I totally believe we will have to raise our defense spending to 2.5% of GDP. In fact, if Trump comes in, he will say that everybody has to do 3% of GDP on defense, which would be much, tens of billions of pounds more than anybody is planning at the moment. And the Conservatives had a timetable for that, to do it by 2030, the 2.5%. Labour doesn't have a timetable. I think they will need to work out how to get that. They're going to have a strategic defence review. That's fair enough for a new government. But the answer that comes out of that review is going to have to be, you're going to need to raise spending to that sort of level, both to give the support to Ukraine and to prepare for all the things that General Sanders has been talking about in his parting shot.
Claire, are they entitled to discuss at NATO how the war might end? Because we had Nick Carter on, who was the head of the General Staff until 2021, and he said all wars have to end, and at some point you have to have that conversation. Now, Nigel Farage went in one direction with that, maybe incorrectly, maybe correctly, but at what point do you start talking about that, do you think?
Well, the difficulty about this summit is that I, on the one hand, want there to be secret talks about just that kind of thing, kind of grown-up conversations about what's really going on. Whereas I'm also very conscious of the fact that you don't want to give any succor to Russia, particularly at this time, to look, I mean, God, you only have to look at the fact that regardless of what you think about what Farage said, any attempt at kind of, I'm not suggesting it was nuanced, but any attempt at having slightly different narratives suddenly becomes you're a Putin apologist. So the difficulty is that whereas we obviously need to have a conversation about what's really going on, or when I say we, NATO does, but I mean, one of the complicating factors is that NATO for some time has talked the rhetoric of NATO expansionism into the East, which has kind of slightly stirred things up in the past. And then it comes to Ukraine coming in and they say, oh, no, you're not ready. You're not mature enough. You haven't passed our tests. So it's neither fish nor fowl. And it does create real tensions. So I would like there to be frank discussions behind the scenes about the real state of the war. Yeah. And that's not the same as me suggesting that Ukraine is abandoned in any way, because for me it is one of those existential wars that's very important from the point of view of national sovereignty and nation states knowing that they can't just be invaded without international solidarity.
It's tricky, William, for Ukraine. So on the one hand, they want to be allowed. We had Yuri Sakon, who's an advisor to one of their ministers, saying they want to be allowed to fire their weapons into Russian territory, weapons provided by the UK or America or NATO or wherever. But you can't have a country doing that and then joining NATO, because the second that happens, we're in World War III. It's very difficult, isn't it, to say you want Ukraine to be in NATO, because that's part of the message we've been giving for years, as Claire is saying. But equally, if they get into NATO without there being absolute certainty about the war ending, we have World War III. Those two things seem very hard to achieve.
Well, that is a dilemma. You're absolutely right. And the possible solution to that is that it should be made clear that Ukraine can join NATO when the war is over, whenever that is, but as soon as the war is over, so that we're not in the situation of NATO joining a war, a live war at the moment. But the great value of NATO is the deterrent against future war. That, of course, that's the main thing NATO has achieved since it was founded in 1949. It has deterred attacks on its members by collective solidarity. And so if Ukraine is swiftly included in that, whenever and however this war comes to an end, that is the big deterrent against a future war. That is the best hope of not having another Ukraine war a few years later. Because if you had a peace talks now and compromised in the middle of everybody's position, well, Russia would keep a lot of Ukraine. And also, a couple of years down the track, having rebuilt the Russian armed forces, they would attack Ukraine again. So that's why peace talks aren't going anywhere at the moment. You have to have a position of strength. And part of that position is Ukraine should be able to join NATO in the near future.
Just before we move on, I'm just interested from a practical and a gossipy point of view, William. When you're going to these big events, these big gatherings, and someone's got difficulties at home, does anyone mention it? Will anyone go to Macron like, why the hell did you give that call, that election? Or Schultz, what's going on in Germany? Or Biden, are you feeling okay? Is there frank conversation? Is there sort of people say everyone's got their own problems, and as world leaders, you kind of experience similar things? So do you share war stories? What sort of, how do you respond to the problems in people's backyards when you're at these big summits?
Oh, there's pretty frank conversations. Depends on the personal relationships, as in any walk of life. But politicians behind the scenes, do really talk politics in a very frank way. And if they know each other in a rather teasing way, and, and say, well, how are you doing after that disaster in your election? And, there might be people saying that to Macron who know him really well. Or they'll be politely saying, well, when do you think a new government might be formed in France, Mr. President? Will it be next week or will it be next year? But it will be discussed, because these things are of vast importance. For instance, on that one, whether France can put a functioning government together now is pretty important to NATO and to Europe's support for Ukraine. So they're bound to be talking about that.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. I'd be worried if very British, wouldn't it, to have a sort of elephant in the room that everyone's having all sorts of other conversations and refusing to mention the thing that's just sitting there.
You wonder, it might be easier, honestly, to have a jibe about what's happening in France than it would be about the president of the United States itself.
Yeah, we're going to get onto that, aren't we? Because could you ever? You couldn't make a joke about that, I don't think, could you? Let's move on before we get on to Biden and his health. Suella Braverman has slammed Rishi Sunak's government. The former Home Secretary told an audience in Washington the Conservatives are governed as Liberals and were defeated as Liberals. She says Rishi Sunak's policy platform was something the new Labour government would quite happily do. She criticised farcical gimmicks like the smoking ban and also plans for letting criminals out early. She described the party as acting as if they are entitled to Conservative votes regardless of whether they do Conservative things. Is she right? Well, she's definitely right. Is she correct? It's a different question. Claire, what do you make of Suella Braverman? Is she scorched earthing here, just appealing to a rabid, very red meat hungry conservative American audience and sort of playing the greatest hits for them? Or is she trying to seriously reorientate the party?
So there's been absolute outrage about her speech. Everything from people accusing her of being anti-lesbian and gay rights because she takes on the progress flag, which, by the way, is the one which involves the TQI++, which is what she's really talking about. And she's also talking about the difficulties that created under a Conservative government in terms of children being vulnerable and open to interventions around sex change and all that controversy. But honestly, the reaction to her, you'd think, I mean, it's been more rabid than the speech. I don't think that Suella Braverman's tone goes down well with people. But if you actually go through the speech, which I kind of read carefully, I think she kind of raises perfectly legitimate issues that the Conservatives have to consider. And there are obviously disputes about why they lost, but there's no doubt about it that taking the voters for granted was one of them. Nobody knew what conservatism was in that sense. A lot of the issues she raises are indeed things which, as it were, on the doorstep, people were very concerned about. It does explain why Reform got so many votes, even if not so many seats. And I think that, therefore, to just dismiss her as being, I mean, you said scorched earth, to dismiss her as being kind of like, oh, she's just like culture warrior gone mad playing to an American audience, means that you don't read the speech. And it's worth actually looking at the themes she raises and seeing if there's anything in them.
That's a very fair point. I guess my point, though, in contradistinction is, if she was serious about raising those points in a way that might lead to the reshaping of the Conservative Party, the manner in which she did it, the feeling that you're in America doing it for cash to a already, you're preaching to a choir there, the tone matters, I think, in terms of what you think she's doing. Is Suella Braverman trying to create a career for herself as a go-to American-style conservative, or is she actually wanting to reshape the Conservative Party? Claire, what do you think?
Oh, sorry, you're asking me. Yeah. Sorry. Well, I don't know. I hate this sort of notion she's doing it. She's a grifter doing it for the money, because I always feel that's overly dismissive. I think she's quite serious about wanting to run the Conservative Party myself. I think speaking at a NatCon conference has its drawbacks for obvious reasons, because it does signal something. But I'm just comparing it to when, I mean, the bit where I really utterly cringed and just thought you have really got to be taken away was when Liz Truss did the American audience, because she just, apart from the fact that she tried to play to the American audience and got it wrong, kept making jokes that didn't work, didn't land, and oh my God, it was awful. I thought Suella Braverman gave a speech that she could have given it anywhere, is what she thinks. She's written, my goodness, she's written it down. I mean, she lost her position in Cabinet precisely because she said this sort of thing. What I'm suggesting, though, is that there is a danger of dismissing her. I understand that maybe it was an odd place to go, but we're discussing it on Times Radio this morning. It's all over the papers. And if she'd have made it, I don't know, in London, you know, a local or whatever, it wouldn't have had the same impact. So this is going to be a conversation, by the way, that does need to, in a way, be international, because I do think that mainstream parties are imploding everywhere. You know, centrism doesn't seem to have the bite that it once had. And I think that the mainstream parties have got to consider, what do we represent? What do we stand for? And stop treating the voters with contempt and take their issues seriously. She's at least trying to do that. I now know that on social media, people will be saying, because they do, oh, Suella Braverman, apologist, therefore you're a fascist, therefore you're this. And all I'm saying is, this is not serious politics. And even though you can say that she's not to your taste, I think that we should take some of her themes seriously.
Might she be an answer, William Hague? Or is the question wrong? If Suella Braverman is the answer for the Conservatives, is the question correct?
Well, I don't want to personalise it. There's a legitimate debate here, as Claire's just been rightly pointing out. I don't particularly agree with her analysis, and I really think it's very important for the Conservatives not to turn into a version of the Republican Party in America and where it's gone. We do have to look at the evidence. I point out in my column in the Times this morning that when you look at the evidence over the weekend, the analysis of why people say they voted how they did by the polling organizations, of those Conservatives who switched to vote for Reform, which was a lot of them, only 13% of those people said it was because the Conservatives were too left-wing. 73% said it was because they thought the Conservatives were not competent. And I suspect that the real answer is not that the Conservatives are too liberal on all those issues that Suella has been talking about. It is the whole saga of Brexit, and then Boris Johnson's premiership, and then Liz Truss's premiership, and then living standards not improving, and public services struggling, and not that much to do with whether they were too left-wing or too right-wing. It's whether governments really deliver. And that is going to have to be the answer for the future of conservatism, of competence and integrity, before we think about, oh, we're going to be a bit more left-wing or a bit more right-wing.
William, who can help do that to try and portray a picture of confidence?
Oh, some brilliant future leader who has yet to emerge. And I don't know who you. I know that this question is like, who should be the leader of the Conservative Party? Well, let's first of all we have to look at, well, who on earth is still left there, who wants to be the leader of the Conservative Party, and then I think they do have to be measured up, in my view, against what I was just describing, of being able to portray integrity, values, and competence. Rather than going off on that sort of politicized mission that we heard about in Suella's speech.
I wonder, William, if you're nervous that a leadership contest is going to do exactly the opposite of portray sort of integrity. It's going to be divisive. You know, the daggers come out, and actually public trust in the Conservatives might be hit even further.
Well, yes, it could. There's a danger in any, but of course it's a Democratic Party, and when a party goes into opposition, it goes through these stages. Remember, the Labour Party went through 10 years of this, of the Ed Miliband leadership, and then swung right over to Jeremy Corbyn, and then swung right back again. So it took a long and divisive period before it sorted itself out to the point it could be elected again. I hope the Conservatives don't take that long, but that you have to allow a healthy debate. Though, you know, it's not when you've been in office 14 years and then had the biggest defeat in your history, definitely people are allowed to debate that from all points of view within the party. So it would be wrong to try to suppress that debate, whether it's from Suella Braverman or whoever.
Claire, you was it the Brexit thing that your eyes flashed?
Well, that was one part of what William said that I disagreed with. You see, I think that one of the answers that's coming from not just Conservatives, but in general, internationally, is what we need are, you know, the grown-ups back in the room, you know, technocrats, competence and so on. Now, I'm not suggesting that I would like an incompetent government. I've actually been rather impressed by the new government coming in and getting on, you know, using the levers of power to say, we don't care what local councils say, we're going to do this anyway, and getting on with it, right? I mean, you do, and then the Tories are going, oh, God, could you do that if you're in government? I mean, they've only seem to have just noticed. So being competent's good, but technocratic rule with no heart is the very reason why we're in the place that we are. And, you know, I remember when Jeremy Hunt got the job and everyone said, oh, it's all okay now. You know, sanity's been resumed. And it's like, no, it wasn't, because you've got to believe in something. And I don't think that, you know, it's not just a question of why did we lose to reform? That's a significant point. But the reason why people voted to leave the European Union were good, sound reasons, and to ignore them and say all we need to do is to make the trains run on time actually misses the heart of what's wrong with the Conservative Party.
So you need heart and you need competence, and who will bring that together? We don't have any idea as of yet. So there you are, William and Claire. We're going to need to discuss whether Biden is the right man to go against Trump. How much should we worry about his age, his health? Is it our business? And if it is our business, how bad is it? This is Times Radio Breakfast with Rosie Wright and Stig Abel.